Hello everyone, it's Matt here and welcome to an update on the Camelback. Now there's been quite a lot of revisioning and redoing on the Camelback, and pretty much it's all been because somebody sort of said, can I have a copy of your file for the Camelback on Instagram? And I was just like, actually I really do need to kind of sort that out because it's been, way down the pecking order in sort of stuff. I've built bits of it, but not actually done a lot with the actual model. Partially because what I've been having to rely on in terms of source material has been very weak almost in some respects. Partially because trying to find that specific thing has been hard, and partly because I've not had drawings to work from. I've been working off effectively some pictures and some anecdotal things and models as well, because in some instances models can be a good source, although the trouble is that some manufacturers will do a mostly one railroad and then add a few bits from others and then brand it for pretty much anything. And one of the big things that sets off the accuracy of this model and really helps it improve is this. It's the Model Railroader Carcyclopedia Volume 1 Steam Locomotives by Lynn Westcott. There is a second volume for diesel locos, which, if it's anything like this one, is really good, and it's one I do want to get at some point, just for reference purposes. But the Camelback, and I've actually got the invoice saved specifically for this, and here it is. So you've got the Camelback drawing on the left hand side, and then you've got some reference photos on the right. Now, these reference photos aren't everything I've worked off, it has to be said. I still need to do and import some of the detail from this book, such as the Firebox backhead details. I need to put those in, and a few of the bits and pieces. But yeah, this book has been a real game changer for how accurate the model is. And how accurate things are done. Now, also, this isn't going to be precisely accurate. Those drawings were done at a time when possibly not much information is available as it is today. There are differences between those drawings and photos of the prototype. The prototype variances are fairly small in terms of compared to the photo, but there are a few little bits and pieces. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transfer to Lego Digital Designer. So you can sort of see there's been a plethora of work done, and you might sort of think, well, I can't really see much in the way the difference is. So I'm going to go from the front end to the rear of the tender in that order, because there's quite a lot of tweaks to be done. The first thing I'm going to talk about, obviously, is the bogie and the front pilot. Now, obviously, this isn't final. I believe there is more clearance I could add to this. I believe the part itself could possibly be moved forward a stud, but this is a kind of roughly good scale at the moment. It's been hard to try and pinpoint. Let me actually do some live work on this. So it's been hard to pinpoint certain scaling, because some photos seem to indicate it's bigger, some photos seem to indicate it's roughly the size it is now. So it's hard to really say that this is the definitive thing. But yeah, the pilot has been redone to this newer, sort of later sort of version with the thinner plough and the wider step boards. Some locos and from photos I've seen didn't actually have these step boards at all and just had steps on the side, and some had these step boards but no ladder. So I've gone for the step board, no ladder version. We always have the cut bar above. The reason why this is on these parts is actually because the studs here means if you use clips it can't actually clear them. So these are this sort of like flesh colour or light nougat colour, because they're supposed to be replaced with brick arm stuff. Brick arm stuff really is going to be the thing that saves this model in certain visuals and other bits and pieces. So that's been redone as well completely. The front here, the sort of, I'll start from bottom up as well, has been changed as well. So the cylinders have been moved back slightly to be more accurate, and they've been moved up as well. So the frame itself has been moved up to help smooth things out. Because it's been moved up, the front has been rebuilt slightly as well. So obviously because the cylinders have moved back, I've had to change a few of the bits and pieces. I've added one of the boxes here for the control system. I can't find many sources about what this is for, but there's supposed to be a couple of boxes in sort of like a tiered format, so you'd have a bigger box and a smaller box. I can only put the bigger box in because of scale. It's really hard to do sort of scale things like this. If I did some snot, it'd possibly fit, but then you're talking about something that's then going to be a bit more fragile than I'd like for the front of a model where you've got all that risky area. So I'm not really that keen on doing it. Moving further up to the boiler and smokebox area, I've thinned out the steam generator. The steam generator is awfully smaller than I've been building them as, so I've thinned that out a great deal. The handrails have actually been moved down because they were here before. They've been moved down a stud on the side, so they're now a lot more accurate in terms of their positioning. And the opposite side, I've actually added one of the generators. There is another one sort of thing that sits about here, which I've yet to add. But again, this is this lot nougat part is one that needs to be replaced with a brick arms example, and that can actually fit in the hole I've already pre-done into the boiler. So there's another piece about here, which I'm going to add, or try and add. But other than that, I'm fairly happy with how the front's turned out. The handrails as well have been reduced in length as well, so this is now just 4 studs because obviously you've got the generator. One of the pumps, whatever it is. I think it's a brake pump. Wouldn't like to say for definite, but I think it's a brake pump. There isn't any other detail on this side, but what you will notice as we move down is that the cab has actually been moved forward a stud. And the reason why that is that because the drawings indicate it's sort of sitting roughly in line with the edge of the front wheel. So I've actually done that as well. So it's now sitting by the front wheel and just behind the dome as well. So the front dome here is the focal point of where the cab position was, because before there was a stud between the dome and the cab. And from pictures it looked okay. But when you got into the real thing and looked at model and, the actual thing compared to the model, the stud gap is way too big, and it's almost butting up against that dome. And the dome was actually in the right place, or that dome was in the right place in comparison to others. So it was a case of, well, that dome is in the right place, definitely in the right place. I don't want to move it. The cab looks like it's one stud too far behind, so the cab got moved forward. And the cab itself has not drastically changed. I haven't put the boiler in the middle yet. That is something I do want to do. But one thing that has changed with the cab is actually the roof. So it's now just a pretty flat roof, except for here, where you've got this 2x2 square. The reason for that is that right below this is actually a second dome for the boiler. And it actually would have been where the steam was captured, because it had a Great Western style of boiler, the Camelbacks, where it had this natural peak for the dome inside the cab, which was where the steam was collected for the regulator to apply to the cylinders. So I've got rid of the what I thought was an air vent. From what I've seen of cabs that didn't sort of have them, they pretty much just left the front door open to let fresh air in. So yeah, I've put this in to cover up where the dome would be, roughly. There is no actual slope to the boiler. The difference in real life, from what I've seen in photos, is at most about 4 inches, and that 4 inches in Lego scale just isn't replicatable in a model as complex as this. When you've got to work in such tight, confined spaces, and when everything's got to fit together. If it was built on a slightly larger scale, possibly 10 wide, it might be doable. but this is supposed to be an 8 wide model, so it's not really feasible. So that's the major change to the cab. Obviously the cab's been moved, because the cab's been moved forward, we've been able to put in the steps and what have you. So there's the frame itself seems to extend back one here, and then you've obviously got the step here, that's new, and then you've got the actual firebox. Now the firebox area itself has changed quite dramatically as well, and obviously I said I'm working from bottom up, so we're going to do that. So the first thing you'll notice is the bottom of the firebox is now black. From what I've seen of certain photos, it wasn't actually a different colour to the rest of the bodywork, so that's now in black. The handrails as well have changed from being on the inside to being on the outside. So you've now, instead of being right up against the boiler and me actually notching out, spacing the boiler for the handrails actually moved to the outside of that step axis here. So the boiler itself is now smoother, and obviously that extra stud means that there's now an 8 stud gap here, so we now can just use a 1x8 tile, and it just looks a lot cleaner in terms of a model. So we've got the handrail stanchions here. Now the handrails itself should have 2 bars in terms of, but almost run parallel to each other, with the top one then curving down. That's way too tiny to do in using Lego. If I was using wire to do the, as a sort of semi-scale thing, it'd probably be a lot more accurate, but this is supposed to be Lego, so it's supposed to be working within the confines, so it's just going to have the one roughly where the top one would be, and then that'll peter down to a clip here. And as I'm moving to the top of the boiler, or towards the fireboxy sort of area, this sort of configuration will be changed partly because the sets have changed. We've got an extra stud to deal with. So because I've done that, I've actually extended these out slightly with a plate here, a 1x1 round plate. I might change it again to have a 2 long Technic connector and use one of the 3 long pegs. The reason for that is that then I can fit a 1 long connector piece in, and then that will mean then that these 2 tanks are slightly bigger and a bit more in keeping, because the tanks itself almost extend within a stud gap. Effectively there's a stud gap between the cab and those, so I think they actually need extending again longer. So it's just a bit picky. The detail here has actually not changed in terms of amount, I don't think, but it certainly has changed position. So the bell has actually been moved back slightly. The pop valves or lift valve are now slightly further back as well. And to get this, we're actually using jumpers. So we've got a 2x2 jumper plate there, a 1x2 jumper there, and a 1x3 jumper there. So the 1x2 and the 1x3 actually line up perfectly here, and it actually means we can now fit in the whistle. Now this is one of those sort of like fire hose sort of nozzle sort of things, and it actually the whistles themselves are actually slanted. So what I'm going to do is use a bit of dark grey flex tubing, and then plug in, then connect over that a hand, and then put a bit of flex tube on that, and that will be as close to a scale whistle as you can get. This is okay. And I have used pistols before, but the pistols are slightly oversized, I think. Kind of a good look though, for that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm going to go a bit more accurate. So this is a stand-in for what should be there. The rear, where you'd have the firebox doors, so there'd be 2 sets, one on each side for a big firebox, are not there at the moment. The snot is something I'm going to deal with soon, but at the moment I've been trying to fix the other parts of the model, and to be honest with you, it's all just detailing, so it's not a high priority. There is one bit of conflict I'm very much sort of debating. There's supposed to be steps between the walkway on the boiler here and between the footplate for the fireman or stoker here. Now the whole thing is that to get these steps, or to try and get these steps, I've had to use this 2x2 corner plate, you know, with the stud missing, which is a little oversized. You know, it is supposed to be very much about, I think, 4 inches in scale. You will notice it's not there, because obviously the step from there to there is quite a lot. But I'm not really sure how else to do it, because, you know, again, it's the confines of scale. This is all snotted to get the width of the firebox. So obviously I can't really change this, you know, to try and get this step in. So it might be one of the optional things. You can either put it as this corner plate and get the step, or just leave it as a 1x2 and then not have the step, but actually have the close coupled look. Because we should reasonably fit around, I'd have said R72 without too much of an issue, even with the fairly close coupled plate. And that's the other thing as well, if you notice. I originally had the as a step coming out from the loco itself, because I thought that, you know, naturally, you know, most locos, if it's a different or abnormal sort of cab configuration, it's actually the footplate actually on the locomotive, just to make things a bit easier. No, on the CNJ, the footplate for the fireman stoker was actually on the tender, so they actually got a 2-level footplate on the tender effectively. So you've got the base one here at the running level, where the steps connect to. Then you've got a second one up here, which is at a higher level, and that is actually at the sort of like end of where the firebox peak sort of like slopes. So I've had to put that in. I've actually used again snot offset, so it's actually using a 1x2 jumper, but then the slope bricks. I've left the gap in the middle. That is prototypical. There is supposed to be, I think it is 4 across the entire length. So you'd have 2 on the outer, so almost on the outer, and then 2 in the middle. I can't do that. And what I can do is this. What I might do as well is actually change the back, so that this can actually be used as a wire run. So when you connect it up, you can actually have a little gap about here, and then the wire run can actually run underneath this footplate to leave all this clear. At the moment I've left the wire run there in the middle, but obviously if there's a space underneath here, because it looks like there might be here, I can then run it through there and then underneath this, and it just makes it look a lot better. So wire runs aren't the only thing that's changed with the tender model and that sort of thing. The underframe as well has been changed as well. The most noticeable thing below footplate level is actually the steps. The steps before were too wide, and compared to drawings and the prototype, too wide was actually rather wide. So I actually changed these to single stud width, and these actually now use the corner panel piece, the 1x1 corner panel piece, and I'm going to put them so that the wall sides are in facing onto the tender, not outer facing, just because it will look slightly better in my opinion, and then it keeps things a bit more uniform. You might find that they don't match on terms of a side configuration, so they match that one purely because that was effectively the easiest way to actually do the model digitally. The other major thing, or the real major thing that's happened between the previous ender and this one, is actually a shortening by about 2 studs. And so that shortening of 2 studs is pretty much just because of the steps. The steps are smaller, so the bogies can be moved, you know, further to the edge. So because they're further to the edge, there's a too big a gap in the middle. So you shrink that slightly, and then you change, you know, it changes the whole dynamic of the tender. You need to completely redo the top line, Because the top line, like the outer shape, wasn't very accurate to the real thing, so that's had to be changed, and it's a whole doohickey. So the underframe at the moment, the underframe is not complete. The bogies are a bit more up to date now. The bogies, depending on the locomotive, precise model, and depends on refits, maintenance jobs, that sort of thing. Depends on the bogies on the tender. Some of them are the more modern sort of freight car style of truck. Some of them are more like the plate-sided version you might find, say, under a Bachmann model. Very similar to looking to some of the Bachmann G70, sort of like bogie side. That's the best way I can describe it. There's a few of the bits and pieces missing. There's the brake actuator missing. I'm not sure these Camelbacks had a water scoop. If I can find evidence to say they did, I'll try and fit one in. But I don't think they did. I think that was more sort of an express locomotive sort of thing, rather than anything else. The rear of the tender, so obviously we talked about the underframe. The rear of the tender is undergone quite a lot of change. So we've actually added in this cut lever for the coupler. It's missing a little piece that should come out here to activate the trip pin for the knuckle. And in real life I could probably do it. In LDD I'm not going to bother. The big major thing with the end of the model is actually this bit here with the steps, and there's a very good reason for that. The original Carcyclopedia drawing had steps in the middle, and for all intents and purposes that was a fairly accurate description. Photos of the real thing suggest otherwise, and actually suggest that the steps should actually be a bit further over to the right hand side. The diagram doesn't have this equipment fitted to it, which I imagine is something to do with the mechanical stoker, or it could be something to do with I don't know, a dynamo for the light. I'm not entirely sure, but a lot of the Camelback tenders seem to have this. The light itself, which is what this is supposed to represent, is very variable. There's some where it's pretty thin. It's pretty much just like effectively what in Lego terms would effectively that net bracket, and then possibly a 1x1 round plate, and then the 1x1 round tile in trans clear. I've gone for the longer style model of headlight, backup light I should say, but it can, it varies per model to model. The real thing is a bit variance. I think it also depends, can depend a bit on the production date. If there's been damage to the headlight for whatever reason, shunting or switch damage, maybe it's been bashed about by the crew, refilling the water cap or something, who knows. So yeah, the major thing really is the steps need to be for at minimum one stud further over, possibly really two, so they kind of fall into the line here. So what I might do is actually move these, delete these completely, and then just have loads of these clips up here. I'll then just have the steps off there, just to make it more accurate. The coal bunker area has been completely changed as well. Again, to support this argument of the top line. The top line is very smooth and very sort of gracefully curved with like S-curves and that sort of thing. That's not achievable in Lego in this sort of scale. If I was going to use custom pieces, possibly, but the trouble is it's a very defined, smooth curve in a very tight space. If I was going to model this in 10 wide, possibly it would be achievable, but again, it's a really tight space. It's not really doable. The water cover here, for when you're at Watertown, you're refilling the tender with water. The base itself should actually be rounded. Lego don't make a round, like a half round plate, or like a 1x2 rounded plate at the moment, or anything like that. The closest you can get to doing this sort of cab would be to use the 2x2 round plates, and then just put a decal or sticker or something between the two outermost round bits, and then that would effectively imitate the flat surface between them. And then you'd also get the nice rounded edge. The battery box area itself, that's just some very basic detailing. It's intended to try and hide most or the worst of the battery box. You can't really hide that cable unless you stick a huge humping great heap of coal there, which I'm not very keen on, because that to me would indicate the locomotive's just started work. I prefer my locomotives to look like they've possibly done a little bit of work, but it's not, fully, it's not fresh from the coal hopper, if you like. Photos do have a bit of variance to them as well with regards to the coal space. This is actually a fairly reasonable stock version, and you do see the coal sometimes piled as high as the roof for the stoker. You do find some with extended coal rails or coal space, so they're actually higher still. Some of them actually matching the roof in terms of coal, so quite clearly, coal carrying capacity on these tenders wasn't all it was cracked up to be, clearly. Sometimes I think crews possibly might have overstocked on coal as well a couple of times. That might be what we're seeing in photographs. It's more than anything else, just the fact that these locomotives were probably quite coal, sort of heavy on coal. I mean, it does have a very wide firebox to maintain, a really good heat across it. You do need to shove a reasonable amount of coal in a reasonably quick amount of time. Because although it's one firebox, there are two doors to actually get into the firebox. So again, your stoker would probably be more than grateful to have extra coal on hand should need arise, and should the engineer need a bit more steam on hand, should we say. Other than that, the whole alignment itself of the coal space has been changed as well. Not really any worse or any better than the original. It's just slightly different. The actual coal space itself, I believe, is actually a stud shorter, which is actually more realistic to the prototype. And again, the tender, aside from the missing backhead detail, is actually the worst aspect of the model. But yeah, it's certainly coming along. There's a lot of things still to do. You can sort of see some of the old bits and pieces from the old tender here. So yeah, there's still quite a lot to do. One modification which I've been toying with, but might not really be well accepted, is to change the size of the firebox. Now, for those of you who compare this model to photos of the real life thing, the firebox has a very smooth, gradual slope towards the front. And you can get reasonably close in Lego by using this 3x6 angled plate. But it's not very realistic. It's angled, don't get me wrong, but the angle itself is too steep. But it's the closest you can get to in Lego without doing maybe a tile at a slope. But then you run into issues with the fact that if you knock it, you actually have a little gap, and that's not, I'd sooner have it oversized using an angled plate than undersized and at risk of actually causing problems while the locomotive's actually running around a track. So to get around that, you have this plate here, angle plate here, which is 3x12. So it's still the same depth, but because it's 12, that slope is a lot more gradual. It's a lot more, akin to the real thing. But you can't fit that into the model because it's too long. But what you could do is get some of these, and right where this 1x2 red tile is, you can actually make a cut just on the edge of that tile. So you would be modifying Lego parts, unfortunately, and that would yield you a far more accurate slope for the firebox. And obviously you'd have to do that to both sides, because you'd have, obviously, it's not just a slope on one side, it's two. But doing that would yield you a really nice, smoothed sort of line for the firebox, which you don't really get on the current model. So that's one possible thing that could be done. But yeah, that's really it in terms of the LDD model. Obviously, you might be also thinking to yourself that it's changed. This bit of recording is slightly different to the original one, and you'd actually be right in that the original recording I did make lost. I didn't have audio on it, so it was essentially me going and the camera panning around. So that's not very good. But since I did that recording and then coming to editing and finding out it's actually faulty, I've actually done some work to the tender. So here is the start of the new tender, or the new version of the tender. The main things that are missing, there's some 2x6 plates that are missing up there. The 1x4 bar there should be in black. The curved bits at the end are in this gold colour rather than black. You've got the lights there, you've got the thing there. The tile for the upcoming exhaust stack is there, but there's nothing there at the moment. The neck brackets themselves are in dark grey, and then you got the end of the tender. I've just done the straight move over one stud close to the end for now. That personally is not far enough. It's a lot further over on the photo of the real thing, so I will be changing that over to a to that clips and flex tube step pattern. Just it's not the most to scale thing, but it's more scale and more accurate than this is at the moment. The only other possible way to do it would be to have a similar sort of thing and use the 1x1 clips and then just put flex tube in that and just hope for the best, because it wouldn't actually be fitted to both sides, it'd just be the one side. Might be more accurate, who's to say. I think it's more of a matter of personal preference at that point. There's a missing tile there. You can't really see because, again, the tender's mostly pretty much all black. You can just see some studs just there. There's a missing 1x6 tile there. It's missing the corner bits there. All the steps, the actual bits are there for the steps. So you've got the all of these modified plates, but there's no corner brackets. Haven't got any in stock, so they need to be ordered. Nothing on the underframe except for the bogies, so very basic there. But yeah, I'm reasonably happy with the design. It's certainly reasonably weighty with that battery box. That battery box is actually not centered in the tender. So if I did sort of center the tender, you do notice it does start to droop slightly towards the front. It's not too bad. But it might be something to watch, in case you're running it backwards. It might have that slight, pertainment to try and bunch up to the loco, which is realistic, I suppose, in some respects, but it's just something to be careful of. But yeah, I'm quite happy with this. It's quite strong, reasonably sturdy. There's plenty of space for wiring down the sides. So if I was going to fit this with I don't know, Buwiz, like I have here, I'd actually thin out the space a bit, because Buwiz is not as big. I can fit it effective almost underneath where the the one bar is to hide the wiring. So now it's stuck in there. There we go. So there is progress made since the recording, but it could effectively I'm stuck waiting for parts at the moment. So yeah, it's oh, those are in grey as well. So yeah, it's coming along reasonably nicely, and hopefully it might be finished, I'd want to say hopefully by my birthday in February. So birthday treat, Loco's complete. But we'll wait and see. There's still a lot to be done. I'd kind of want, although the CNJ used dark green coaches, I'd kind of want to get that dark red complete, because I think the dark red and the Camelback would look quite good together. But yeah, that's it for the Camelback. Obviously, there's a great deal to be done. I got to finish the digital model off. There's not too much left as far as I'm concerned. It's, you know, a reasonable amount. And after that, you know, I can do what I want with it. So who knows? I might, you know, agree to Joe's demand. I wouldn't say demand. You know, request. And it's probably the most accurate term for it. And you know, might give him a copy in kind for a donation, possibly. Well, not to me, to a charitable cause. But I'm going to leave it at that, I think. If you've got any questions, pop them down below, and that's it for now, and see you later.